NBC News international correspondent Matt Bradley joins us now from Tel Aviv with more on this. Matt, good morning. So can you start by telling us more about the new aid that is entering Gaza? We heard there it's certainly not enough, but is it making any difference on the ground?
Well, I mean, we're seeing people picking it up. We're seeing people walking away with it. There is quite a bit of aid that's going in, but, you know, we're talking about a population of about 2.2 million people who have been starved, many of them nearly to death, some of them to death. And when we're talking about children who are receiving this aid, in many cases, we're talking about malnutrition that will be very difficult to reverse without more advanced medical care and intervention. So we're not unlikely to see an immediate effect from this opening of aid, and it's unclear what the Israelis' intentions are from here on out, whether they're going to open the spigot even more and let more aid in, or whether they're just going to be satisfied with this and close it almost entirely as they have done in the past. So, again, we're hearing all of this international criticism. This is clearly meant by the Israelis to try to meet some of that anger that is just rising up throughout the world from these images that we're seeing. This food aid that's coming in, it is reaching people, and people do seem as though they are able to get it. But you're seeing these images, people clamoring to get to some of these aid drop sites.
Matt, those comments from President Trump, they really mark kind of a rare break with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Up until this point, Mr. Trump seemed reluctant to really use U.S. power to bring aid into Gaza. But something seems to have changed here. What do we think that is? And do we know anything about plans to actually set up food centers, as was mentioned there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, Savannah. It was only a couple of weeks ago when President Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu looked as though they were just best buds. President Trump had taken a sincerely big political risk when he decided to intervene on Israel's behalf to strike Iran. And, you know, obviously Benjamin Netanyahu was excessively grateful to that. And they celebrated on Benjamin Netanyahu's third trip to Washington since the president had taken power. Now, really, the president has kind of hit Netanyahu right where he lives in saying that there is famine in the Gaza Strip. Now, you ask what changed. I really don't know. But we can take the president's word for it, that he just simply, like the rest of us, saw those images on TV and decided this is something, as he said, that you can't fake.
Matt, Israel is not only facing foreign pressure over the aid situation in Gaza. Now, for the first time, we have two rights groups from within Israel saying their country is committing genocide in the enclave. Tell us more. How prominent are these groups, and how is the Israeli government responding to that?
Yeah, I mean, these are some of the most well-known, most respected groups in the Israeli human rights sort of environment here. B'Tselem and Physicians for Human Rights. Now, we know that there are tons of other human rights groups here in Israel, but these, as you mentioned, are the first two. Now, one of the things that was really central to the argument they made in front of the whole world yesterday in a press conference was the question of intent. Genocide has a somewhat clear definition in international law. It's the destruction of a population in whole or in part. And what justices, what people who would adjudicate this kind of thing to make that designation of genocide, which comes with legal obligations to the world, to make that designation requires an expression of intent. So one of the things that they did in their presentation was to show a long sort of list of all of the comments from high-level Israeli politicians who made dehumanizing remarks or basically implied that they wanted to destroy the population of the Gaza Strip. That is what convinced these two groups.
Matt Bradley reporting from Tel Aviv. Matt, thank you.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.